This is episode 107 of the Death to Tyrants podcast.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Austin, Texas, where, man, it's not here necessarily, but all over the states, it's a wild time right now, and we're seeing the actions of police brutality up in Minnesota, and we're seeing a lot of people pushing for police action in shutting down businesses and keeping economies and people out of work and economies locked down. And it's interesting that a lot of people don't see the similarities in those things. And, you know, you see a lot of the left really upset by a man dying at the hands of a police officer. And we agree. I believe that, you know, most libertarians are horrified at what we saw with that cop up in Minnesota. But it's interesting because a lot of the left are the ones pushing to keep things locked down. And I think an interesting issue is that they don't understand that the end game of what they're pushing is, let's call it the government, the jackbooted thug boot on your neck. And it's really interesting that once they see it on camera, when a cop's caught doing it, well, then they're horrified. Yet, how do you think these lockdowns should be enforced? I've seen leftist friends saying stuff like, why aren't the cops enforcing this lockdown? There's no point having it if they don't go around and enforce it. We should have drones flying over and see who's leaving their house. Well, what's the end game when that happens? Because what if I own a clothing boutique and I said, I'm not locking down. The government can't tell me to do that. This is my property. It's my business. And you can't tell me not to operate it. Well, guess who comes to shut you down, guys? It's the jackbooted thugs, like the one kneeling on the man's head in Minneapolis. That's the end game of that political philosophy. And you know now the left, they're the pro-war faction, along with the neocons, of course, which have basically moved back to the left where they started. And then they're the ones that question you if you dare speak out against the CIA or the security state, the deep state we'll call it. Well, that's treason if you speak out against. How could you not trust your own CIA? And then all of a sudden, when a cop's caught doing something horrible, everyone just freaks out. The left doesn't like that. Well, look, guys, that's the authoritarian philosophy that you're pushing. That's what it looks like in its purest form. And, you know, as libertarians, we're consistently against anything like that, against the war, against the CIA, against the FBI. I mean, we can narrow it down if you want, against state police forces, against government police forces. And it's interesting. We, you know, once again, I feel like we're the only philosophy that sees this for what it is. Anyway, that's my little rant. And I get into this to start out with because I've got John Whitehead on the show, and he's from the Rutherford Institute, and he's really, really good. He's been writing about the police state and the horrors of that, the drug war and war in general, for years and years. And the Rutherford Institute, what a great organization. We get into what they do over there. Let me tell you real quick about John Whitehead. He writes for LouRockwell.com. That's how I see a lot of his articles. You guys probably recognize that name from seeing him on there. He's he's got such a great bio here. John Whitehead, constitutional attorney and author, and is founder and president of the Rutherford Institute. He is the author of A Government of Wolves, The Emerging American Police State, and The Change Manifesto. Now, that's just two of the books mentioned in this bio. Go to the Rutherford Institute and you will see he's written a lot, and that's over at rutherford.org. He is here today with us on Death to Tyrants. John Whitehead, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir. I've been reading your articles for quite some time, but in preparation for this interview, I had to research you a little more, and I've been looking at the Rutherford Institute, and it's truly impressive. What a great organization. And even the website is done really well. Talk about what you guys do over at the Rutherford Institute.
Well, we do a number of things. It was an organization I started in 1982 to help people who couldn't get lawyers, basically. And I'd just gotten out of law school, essentially. And I raised money when we handled cases. We just handled a case in New York where a church was doing a drive-in church service. People were all sitting in their cars, and the pastor was essentially doing the service over his cell phone to them. And he was threatened with a fine by the police that it wasn't safe to be doing. It was ridiculous. And we wrote a strong letter saying if they didn't back off and leave him alone, we would sue them. And they finally backed off the cops, and he went ahead and now is doing his services. But that's the kind of, we handle all kinds of, I've handled many religions, many cases. I'm a civil libertarian, which means I will defend anybody's rights who are violated by the Constitution. So that's one thing that we do. We have lawyers spread around the country that donate their time to us now. We pay the expenses that they have to incur. And as you said, you've been to our website. We do a lot of educational things. The commentaries, we do a weekly commentary. We put out position papers on protecting people's rights. And I've written over 30 books, my last two books being A Government of Wolves and Battlefield America, both bestsellers on Amazon. So we get a lot of information out there. But my goal is basically to get people awake, get them educated, so they'll start acting and participating in their government.
You write a lot on the police state and abuses of power. And boy, what a time we're living through right now in those regards. What are your thoughts on this COVID moment and the lockdowns across the country?
Well, the word lockdowns comes from a terminology used in prisons. And lockdowns are what happens in prisons when the prisoners are maybe either rioting or upset about something. And again, I've been in and out of prisons, especially in my early career. So I would say the way lockdowns are used, it does create a prison. And many Americans accept that fact. We have to be careful and responsible in a time when there may be a possible really dangerous pandemic or whatever. But we have to be careful that as you sweep out of these things, this doesn't become something that's normal, the new normal, as some people are using the term. And it's been many years now. I would say since 9/11, we've been conditioned to the fact that we need to prepare for lockdowns. The government is the savior. People need to, always looking for a terrorist or someone who might be coughing. You can turn over to the police. We're seeing those kind of crazy things, which, as I detail in my books, very much mirrors Nazi Germany, where people were turned in. And that's how they wound up in the concentration camps. Many people, is their neighbors turned them in for doing certain things. For example, in Nazi Germany, if you listened to BBC radio, if you were a German out of England, that was considered criminal. And neighbors would report people, and the Gestapo and police would come and arrest people and take them away for that. But that was neighbors doing it. So we have to be really careful that we're not being psychologically re-engineered, which I think we are, to accept the fact that we live in a police state and that with any kind of so-called epidemic, emergency, 9/11, we'll give over our rights. After 9/11, we had the U.S. Patriot Act, which was over 400 pages and was passed in less than a month after 9/11. And the obvious idea, and many people have analyzed the Patriot Act, which took away many of our freedoms, allowing the government to come to your banks, the FBI, and get all your information, the banks can't tell you, and do all this going into your home and downloading stuff off your computers, creating national security letters where the police just show up and demand information from people. That all happened, and it's just gone on. And we have it now. It's re-up. We have the National Defense Authorization Act now, which allows the president to, target someone as an extremist or a terrorist, and they can wind up in a concentration camp somewhere. We do have them, obviously, around the country, and they disappear. We've had a few cases where we've actually defended people who have been rounded up. If you want one case that we might want to talk about a little bit later is the Brandon Robb case, the Marine that was rounded up because of what he was saying on Facebook. He was anti-Obama during the Obama period. But that's what I think. I think that, as I say, fear creates its own prison walls. And we're creating our own prison walls right now because we're so fearful. And I think it's going to continue.
Comparisons between the after 9/11 and the war on terrorism and everything and the Patriot Act to what we're seeing now. I've been trying to compare. I see some similarities between the propaganda being pushed out for the war in Iraq and the quote unquote WMD threat that we were under at the time, and some of the propaganda that the lockdown warriors are pushing out now. Have you seen any similarities there as well?
Oh, yeah. It's governments from the beginning of time, and you have to go back and study the so-called American government, which I've detailed this in my commentaries in my books. Right as World War II was ending, the United States probably brought in about 5,000 Nazis from the Nazi Germany.
Yes.
If people don't know this, look up Project Paperclip. It is a fact. The government admits it. They've been caught on that one. And Reinhold Gehlen, for example, helped set up the NSA. He was one of Hitler's biggest spy chiefs. They came in, they spread out into major universities, the military, the government. And I think at that point we saw a shift in government. I think that the philosophy of government was watch, control. And many people during that time wanted that. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI had no qualms about spying on Americans. If people forget their history, and it's not taught in the so-called schools we have today, the state-run schools that don't want kids to be rebellious in any way. That's why they don't teach the Constitution anymore. And I can explain that a little later. But so the government started changing then during the McCarthy era. They were rounding up people because they had an opinion. They might have liked someone who might have been a left-winger or whatever, a communist or a socialist. And so the so-called freedom in America started waning during that period. And there was a rebellion in the 60s somewhat, and that has gone away. I mean, some of these 60 rebels I'm talking to today are right-wingers now, and they're pushing for strong government to smash people down. It's crazy when you see it, but if you're not awake, and that's the key, as I say, your mind is useless if your eyes are blind. If you can't see what's going on around you. But we have to be educated in that way. As I mentioned earlier, kids in public schools today, I talk to people graduating from law school that can't tell me what's in the First Amendment. They stumble when I ask them what's in the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth. They have no idea. And the crazy thing is that the Bill of Rights is only 462 words. I mean, you could be a very low IQ person and read the Bill of Rights and get the clue, but they don't read them anymore. They don't study the Declaration of Independence in many schools. Why? If you read the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, it is something calling for an overthrow of government. They don't want that. They want everybody under control, and they've got a very good handle on it right now. As we've seen with this COVID-19 thing, people can be made fearful very easily and controlled. And it's something that we've seen throughout the history of mankind. And in my opinion, with the rise of technocracy, which we are in a technocracy right now in this country, everything you're doing is being watched. I mean, your TV listens to you, your cell phone. Listen, the FBI admits they can turn your cell phone on from a distance, even when it's off, and it becomes an audio listening device. Your laptop's a screen device. It watches what you're doing. I mean, they have tremendous, amazing powers. And with this new contact tracing now they're going to be doing and creating immunity passports. And I just did some research finding some airports now are demanding, basically. They want the thermal imaging cameras. They want contact tracing. They want to have an immunity passport before you get on an airplane. Listen, there's no difference between an airport that does that or an airlines and the government. They all work together. We have a very large corporate state. I mean, Google openly admits it works with China and the United States in setting up their surveillance systems. So the people running the big corporations don't really give a damn about what country they're in. They just want your money, wherever they're going to get it. And Facebook is the same way. We live in a very corporate technocracy. That, in the future is, by the way, artificial intelligence, as it continues to take control of things, we're seen now as data bits by the government. We're going to be seen as even minor data bits, something that can be erased easily. Like you can, if your vacuum cleaner gets old or something, you toss it out. That's the way people are going to be viewed by artificial intelligence. And that's already here, by the way.
Something you just touched upon there, and you touched upon in this article that you wrote that I will link to in the show notes page, is that the current crop of college graduates and that younger generation, I mean, it's almost all they know is government control over their lives. There's people fighting in Afghanistan that weren't really aware of 9/11. They weren't alive for 9/11. And when you think of the technocratic issues that you're pointing out in the administrative state and all of these things that have invaded all of our lives, but some of us see the difference, like, well, it didn't used to be that way so much. It's almost a wonder, it's not any wonder, I should say, that younger people are so readily accepting of things like this lockdown and things like you're discussing here. Do you see that same thing?
Yes, the average American watches 150 hours a month of screen devices and television, whatever they're watching. Carl Bernstein and Woodward, the people who exposed Richard Nixon, who was working close, by the way, with J. Edgar Hoover and watching everybody. If you remember John Lennon, the Beatle, they had a large file on him, and they were trying to get rid of him, and I think they did in the end. I've argued that I think the government did away with John Lennon in the end, like they did with Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy. Any kind of rebel that gets out there is going to be strong. But the point is that if you believe what you see on your screen devices by the talking heads, you're not very wise, because they're controlled by money. Most of your CNN, Fox News, whatever you're watching is controlled by large corporate entities that are selling the pharmaceuticals. All these big companies are behind those. And you're being controlled by people who basically want one thing, your money. And that's it. I mean, your tax money, they want your product money, and how they do that, but they manipulate and can control you. And that's what we're seeing today. And one of the dangerous movements I see is the movement towards sort of a virtual existence in your home. I mean, Bill Gates just said recently, what do we need schools for if we can have virtual education? You mean I'm going to get everything I know from a computer or a screen device by somebody who may not even be a real person? We got to really be careful. I think we have to go back to being people and get away from all the screen devices. Some screen, it's okay to watch some. Programs like this are good. There are things out there, but if you're thinking you're going to get the news or get your information from mainstream media, and I'll give you a good example, there are 80,000 SWAT team raids annually in America where cops are busting through doors, shooting up to 500 dogs a day, killing kids and old ladies, and it's virtually never carried on the news. I mean, what we're seeing in Minneapolis now, that happened to get caught, but someone videotaped the cop doing something awful. But most of the time, we don't hear about any of these. There were 3,000 SWAT team raids in the 1980s, 80,000 annually now. I mean, you don't hear about this stuff. And the stuff we're talking about, how often do you hear anybody on CNN or Fox even mention this stuff? They don't. We live in a police state. I mean, the police can do basically what they want to do today, and they're doing it. Occasionally, they will get caught. But do I think it's going to reform the police? No. This has happened many times. So.
Yeah, it's something that I found interesting with the current issue with the cop killing the man in Minnesota. A lot of people that I'm friends with that will say are on the left are flipping out on how terrible it is. And I'm looking at it saying, a lot of you guys are the same people that champion the CIA, the FBI, the national security state, certainly the lockdown measures. And I look at all of those things as the end goal for a lot of them, or maybe not goal, but the logical conclusion to this massive police state is a boot on your head and a boot on your neck. And I find it interesting that so many people that champion, how dare you question the CIA? You must be not a patriot or something. They champion all of these state-run authority organizations, and then they flip out when they see one do something that is, abuse of power. Do you see any hypocrisy or irony in that?
Of course, yeah. But see, again, they don't know their history. They go to schools that don't teach them the truth, and they don't know what's going on. The CIA is one of the most corrupt institutions that's ever existed. Folks, hey, I'm yelling to you now. Edward Snowden tried to tell you that. Julian Assange, and now Julian Assange is in a cage somewhere. And no one seems to give a damn, unfortunately. But Edward Snowden came out and said it. They're corrupt. They're watching everything you're doing. I've talked to former NSA agents that have read my books and met with me, tell me the same thing. Listen, the Fourth Amendment says this, and again, nobody knows the Constitution very well. The government is not supposed to do surveillance on you unless they have some evidence that you're doing something wrong or headed in that direction. Okay, when you have the NSA downloading 400 or 500 million phone calls a day from American citizens, recording them, when you have Amazon building an intelligence cloud for all 17 agencies, and they share in all the information that the intelligence agencies have about us, and they share it back and forth. And now Amazon's announced they're giving over your biometric information to this intelligence cloud, your DNA, all your facial stuff, your fingerprints. They're creating a bigger monster, a monster that's going to devour us. But how do you keep us under control? You keep people under control by giving them illusions like they live in a democracy or whatever. And if you really think about that, I mean, you have to be kind of idiotic to think you actually live in a free country where you have 350 million people, and when you have a presidential election, you got to vote for one nincompoop or another nincompoop. You get two choices. You're kidding me. Out of all the people in the country, I go to the drugstore and I have 15 cold medicines I can choose from. I go to an election booth, and what am I voting for? Somebody that's been handpicked, and a lot of times by the intelligence agencies. So it's a scary scenario we've arrived at. But people have been, again, if you're smart, go back and read 1984 by George Orwell, who predicted this stuff. Aldous Huxley, Philip K. Dick, some of the great writers said that, sooner or later we're going to become machines and stuff like that. Like Philip, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Blade Runner. That's
yes.
Philip K. Dick. We're android future. That's really getting close. I mean, in China now they have androids, if you want to call them that, digital beings that are giving the news. They're not even real people. That's already in the movement, which leads to another thing the government never does, and that is when they have programs, they develop them fully, and then they'll edge them out a little bit. Like they'll say, this is emerging, we're working on this. Once they announce it, it's already done. That's the way the government's always operated in this country. And what we're seeing today, getting to the point of truth is going to be very, very difficult. And what I'm telling people is read your history, study the developments of civilization. There are good books out there. Some of my books are worth reading. Other great authors I've mentioned, they're out there. They're writing and trying to tell people this is where we're at now, and we're there. When the police can bust through your door over 80,000 times annually in this country and drag people away, and listen, many times they're in the wrong house. They haven't followed the warrant procedure. They haven't knocked on your door to see if you're a person. And we've handled those cases, by the way. They're detailed in my books. It's a scary situation, and no one is saying anything about it. The media is not saying anything about it, whatever. And if you live in a free country, how many people really participate in their government at all?
Right, not very many at all.
And if you think voting is participation, you're very foolish. Voting is for slaves. It's for, again, here's your two choices: this billionaire, this billionaire. Oh, okay. That's it. Who lives in a mansion, by the way, like a monarch. And we do have a monarch, the president. He does executive orders. He sits down and says, I don't want this to be, and he does it. Is that a free government when we have somebody sitting there making executive orders and stuff? And that's the case we had with Brandon Robb, the young Marine that we had who opposed that. Obama did a lot of executive orders, and he was opposing it, saying he was a dictator and he should be arrested. I mean, they raided his home and put him in a mental hospital, a decorated Marine, because of that. We filed a lawsuit and got him out eventually. They put him in a mental institution for questioning the president without a hearing.
Wow. And y'all did get him out.
That's called civil commitment, by the way. Look it up. 1.5 million people disappear into mental hospitals annually in America under that rule. Think about it.
And you said you guys did get him out of that hospital?
Got him out, yes. We filed a lawsuit. Well, we do PR. We get it out in the news, and even people who are half asleep when they see that kind of stuff say, this is nuts. And the judge just said, it was a local county judge in Virginia who said, this man, what's he in here for? What did you people do this for? But then we sued the police, and who arrested him was the local police and SWAT team gear. NSA, CIA agents, FBI agents arrived and pulled this guy away. He didn't even own a weapon, by the way. He did not own a weapon. They pulled him away and put him in a mental hospital. Look it up, Brandon Robb case. We won it, but when we filed in federal court to hold the government liable, the courts ruled they had qualified immunity. They just were acting, in good faith and that whatever, and you can't hold them accountable, which happens in almost 99% of the cases against police or government agents. That's how our free government operates. They get away with it. We don't.
Right. I want to get some of the tips that you have for the younger generation in this article were really well done and wonderful to read. I wanted you to talk about some of them. I loved the cultivate spirituality, reject materialism, and put people first. Can you elaborate on that one? Well,
yeah, we're, again, I quote Martin Luther King in that section. King was a great speaker. I mean, he wasn't perfect, but one thing he was good at was causing trouble and scaring the crap out of the government with nonviolence. And he was very good at that. But put people first. And that's the one thing that we've taken out of our culture. We have no empathy, basically, for other individuals. Or you wouldn't see people calling the cops on somebody for not wearing a mask or coughing or whatever. Care about other people. And I can read you this great quote from Martin Luther King, which he gave at a church in 1967. It's only a couple of sentences. He said, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motive, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and materialism are incapable of being conquered." So it's what the great religions of the time, Jesus Christ and people like that argued, do unto others as you would have done unto me. Do you want to be arrested for coughing? Do you want your house smashed through in the middle of the night? I mean, why would police do that? I mean, I've talked to some policemen who have backed off and said, I don't want to do this anymore. This is wrong, busting through people's doors in the middle of the night. We had a case here recently that we worked on in Maryland, a guy named Duncan Limp, if you hadn't heard of the case. He was shot in his bed.
Yep.
He was shot in his bed. His family wanted to go protest and keep social distancing. The cops threatened him with a large fine and jail sentence. We backed them off. We fought that. So, again, what we can do in the end, people often ask me, what in the world can we do? Well, you can start getting down to your local governments will listen to you. The government in Washington, D.C., I've sued in and out of Washington, D.C. for 40 years. I sued the president of the United States. Won the case, by the way. His name was Bill Clinton, on sexual harassment. The point is that you can make it an impact locally. You can really do that by getting people together, getting in groups, taking over city councils, marching, signs. They hate that. And John Lennon was right. John Lennon, the former Beatle, who said, the thing that the government can't handle the most is humor and nonviolence. They can't handle that. The violent stuff we're seeing in Minneapolis, they will always use against people. And they will get over there and they'll start yelling and screaming and stuff, how bad people are who riot. When if you took the same group of people and did sit-ins and blocked traffic, they may get arrested and things like that. But we've defended a lot of people who do those things. You can change your local government. They'll start backing off. Sooner or later, these people will hide back in their own homes, the government officials, and you can take over the city council and cancel the SWAT team raids. Adhere to the Fourth Amendment, folks. And so there are a lot of things you can do to really change things and create a real world out there. But the world we live in today is like a world that just doesn't really exist. except in someone's head. And we let it happen because we're not attuned to what's happening in society. We're not attuned to what the media is doing. We trust the media. And what did James Madison say? The guy who wrote the Bill of Rights? We ought to distrust all those in power. That's the first principle of a patriot. Give me liberty or give me death. And I would rather live in a world. We have this contact tracing where people are going to be supposedly showing up at your door, wanting to see what you've done or what if you touched somebody or whatever. People should be telling them to get off of my property. This is my land. This is my property. If you don't like and you don't have to listen to a cop. If a cop stops you on the street, you have rights. You don't have to say anything. If they arrest you, they arrest you. But if you're that afraid of everything, if you have children or whatever, I feel sorry for your children or your people around you. If you want freedom, you have to stand up for it yourself.
Well put, well put. And before we get out of here, one of the, I think one of the most important things to fight against today and really any time is war, especially the ones that this country is fighting for these days. Speak upon your bullet point, say no to war.
Yeah, say no to war. War is the way that the big corporations make all their money. Why has Donald Trump, by the way, since he's been president, dropped almost 75,000 bombs in the Middle East? Why in the world? If he's such a wonderful man. Now, see, I'm not right wing or left wing. I just look at what people do. What kind of person drops bombs on people, and many of them may be children or whatever, you don't know? So someone can make money? Is that it? What are we doing that for? So we're scaring somebody? It makes no sense in the end. I had a former military man, high in the military, who quit the military. And he came to visit me once. And this is a guy who actually was an Air Force pilot, did some really far out things for his country, good things. But he said that he quit. He just basically walked in one day and said, I'm resigning. I'm getting out of here. And they finally let him go. He said he was being driven by his assistant in a Jeep around Afghanistan, and he passed the field. It was an opium field. He said, what is that? And they said, that's a big opium field. And you know who was guarding it? American troops. He threw a fit. And he quit over it and looked him in the eye, and said, I'm not going to do this thing. I'm not dropping any more bombs. And he quit. It's much more corrupt. Under the Obama administration, large boxes and crates of cash were being shipped over to Taliban types, and they didn't know what happened to it. It was never accounted for, millions of dollars. And they're taxing the crap out of me and you. These people don't have any morals. They wouldn't do what they do. So what's it going to take? People with morals. What's moral? I'll stand up for your rights. Okay? If you get kicked in the head, I'll try to do my best to help you. Okay? I'm here to be here. And I tell people, you're here to do one thing in this life. If you don't get this, you're probably going to return if there's reincarnation or whatever. Or when you go over to the other side, somebody might be waiting with a pitchfork. You're here to help one another. We're here to make sure that we all are treated fairly and right. If we all took that principle and applied it, we could change the world.
Excellent. That's really well put, Mr. Whitehead. All right, it's time to get out of here, but I want you to plug away at your sites, your Twitter, anything where people can find your stuff online.
Yeah, go to Rutherford.org, Rutherford.org, read our weekly commentaries. They're all footnoted, by the way. And get educated. Education precedes action. And you're not going to get it off of TV. Read some good articles and stuff and get the facts and go down to your city councils and make those people listen to you. They're taking your money, okay?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here on Death to Tyrants, John Whitehead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good interview.
Yes, sir. What a great interview with John Whitehead. Please go over to the Rutherford Institute. And what they have, like I said early on, it's a great website, not just a great organization, but they have cool merch as well. And check out some of his books. I think after hearing him on this interview, he's pretty damn good on everything. So let's see. Real quick. I know I get a lot of emails and comments on how good Death to Tyrants is produced. And I can say that and I can brag on it because it's not me doing it. I just do the show and send everything off to my guy, Chris Williams, over at Podsworth Media, podsworth.com. If you guys are doing a podcast and you were doing what I did early on, don't go listen to those early episodes. It makes me cringe, but you're trying to do your own production and you realize, geez, this is really tedious. It takes a lot of time and it just sounds okay when I'm done. I can't quite get the professional sound that I hear when I hear the Tom Woods Show or the Bob Murphy Show or Death to Tyrants. And that's because you're not doing it with Chris Williams. Chris Williams over at Podsworth.com is the man, and he's the one that produces all the shows I just listed, among many, many others. And go give him some business. If you got a podcast and you want it to sound amazing, Podsworth.com. Chris Williams is your man. And about us, let's see. The Libertarian Party has now selected who will run for president as the Libertarian, the messenger, we'll say. Because that's what it's all about, the messenger, to get these principles out to everyone. They have selected Jo Jorgensen to represent the Libertarian Party in the presidential race 2020. She's going to be on this show in a few weeks, but what I'm getting at now is you can join the LP, and if you want to do that, join through me, and I get a small little kickback. That is over at www.lp.org/Death to Tyrants. Find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Death to Tyrants podcast. What else? Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. If you would like to donate anything to this show, I promise you, every last penny I get goes into this show. I don't use it on frivolous purchases. I promise it's all for this show. That's at patreon.com/Death to Tyrants. And you guys have an excellent week. Go out, be mask free, have a good time, and don't let the bastards get you down. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.